The topic today is the essence of civilization. Apparently, this topic is a bit too academic, and civilization has got a definite meaning and significance in anthropology, sociology, history, and so on. Civilization and culture. But right now, my purpose is to interpret the implications of culture and civilization in the light of Vedanta, as interpreted by Swami Vivekananda. Now, if you read Swamiji's complete works, you find Swamiji draws a line of demarcation between culture and civilization. In fact, this is a definite contribution of Swamiji to sociology and anthropology. He says culture is something related to a system of universal morality, spiritual values, and higher values and goals in life. On the other hand, civilization signifies a definite stage of advancement in the collective life of a society. As society advances in science and technology, in its organizational methods, in work ethic, and in the genius in making proper use of the tools of science and technology, you reach a very high level of civilization. But Swamiji says culture, on the other hand, is a higher value. Towards the end of complete works, Swamiji hints that at one stage, culture and civilization converge. They become one. These are some of his conclusions. So my purpose here is to interpret these two terms, culture and civilization, as interpreted by Swami Vivekananda. Now, as I said earlier, there is a clear line of demarcation between culture and civilization. From a Vedantic perspective, Swamiji says, culture includes not only the pursuit of the good things of life in this world, with the help of science and technology, but also a higher spiritual value. And he says that many of the ancient civilizations, referring to the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Greco-Roman, Egyptian, and so on, Swamiji says many of these civilizations, which had advanced levels of science and technology, judging by those periods, vanished from the planet because they did not evolve into a full-fledged spiritual culture. See, a civilization which clings fast to non-eternal values, perishable values, will perish. On the other hand, a scheme of life, a collective scheme of life, which takes eternal spiritual values as its supreme goal, will become eternal, because it is the value, the ultimate supreme value that we uphold, that decides the destiny of civilizations and cultures. In this context, he says, certain ancient civilizations, in fact, evolved into culture. But certain civilizations did not. And those civilizations, which included dharma, what he calls dharma, let us say dharma signifies the totality of virtues, values, which uphold, which preserve the existence of life in this world. In fact, the word dharma is derived from the root dhr, that's the root, the Sanskrit root. And that root is explained by Sanskrit grammarians as something like a value system, a higher motive in life which preserves, which keeps intact certain fundamental values of life. So, dharyate iti dharma. That's a description in Sanskrit language, which literally means that which preserves, that which makes you eternal, that which enables you to cling to certain eternal spiritual and moral values. That is dharma. Now, those civilizations which regulated the pursuit of comforts and enjoyments with the help of science and technology, but upheld this eternal value of dharma, became culture, evolved into culture, because dharma ultimately leads you to a higher spiritual goal, which is the transcendental value, which Swamiji calls, of course, liberation or moksha. In purely sociological terms, we can say this ultimate supreme value is that which makes you aware of the limitations of pursuit of empirical values, secular values. Secular comforts, secular values are necessary. Science and technology are necessary, but science and technology cannot teach us how to make proper use of their blessings, their end products, knowledge, power, efficiency, organization skill. All these values are enriched and reinforced by advancements in science and technology. But science and technology by themselves cannot teach us how to make proper use of the fruits of science and technology. It is dharma which enables us, which teaches us how to make proper use of the blessings of science and technology. So he says, those civilizations which upheld certain eternal spiritual and moral values evolved into cultures. On the other hand, those civilizations which only stressed secular values vanished, because secular values can never be eternal. Now, judging, in terms of history, we can say, see, for example, Swamiji gives a very radical interpretation to the whole concept of human history. He says here, the history of human civilization and culture is not the history of battles, wars, and great events centering around kings and emperors and military heroes. You have to remember, these ideas he expounded almost 30 or 40 years before great historians like Toynbee expounded similar ideas in his study of world history. Toynbee and Durand, who started altogether new chapters in modern historiography, came almost 40 or 50 years later, after Swamiji's passing away. But almost 120 years or even earlier, Swamiji says that history is not the history of great events, epoch-making events, wars and battles taking place in society. History is rather the gradual spiritualization of society. It's a very abstract concept. So every society is evolving. So society, as it evolves from the stage of civilization to culture, it becomes more and more spiritual. But many civilizations did not attain this goal, and they vanished from the planet. And here he gives the examples of Babylonian, Assyrian, Greco-Roman, and Egyptian, these four civilizations. He says, for example, Babylonian, Assyrian, these were ancient civilizations, and they were certainly advanced civilizations, judging by the yardstick of those centuries, those ages. They have perfected an excellent military machine. Yes, especially Assyrians were well known for their military skills. They were experts in making proper use of chariots and cavalry and so on. And again, Babylonians, they had also advanced systems of warfare. And then Swamiji refers to Egyptians who perfected a very, very wonderful system of architecture and certain aspects of technology, but not much of warfare. And then he refers to Greco-Roman. So the Greeks developed a very near foolproof system of administration. They stressed perfectionism, discipline, leadership skills, and so on. The history of Sparta and the number of battles with the Spartans fought against the Persian Empire, which was actually, Sparta was a tiny city-state in Greece, and Persian Empire was a huge political military mechanism. But in the Peloponnesian War, we find the Persians were completely defeated. So he gives all these examples as excellences reached or attained by ancient civilizations like the Greeks in secular values, in military skill, organization, discipline, leadership skills, and so on. But they vanished from the face of earth. If you want to know anything about the ancient Babylonian or ancient Greek civilizations, you had to visit the sites of excavations. You had to read books on history, or you have to visit historical museums. If you want to know how the ancient Greek city-states actually lived, what were the areas in which they reached a very high level of perfection, you can't see any living symbols of those civilizations in today's world. So also Roman architecture, Roman military machines, Roman roads, Roman law, Roman administrative traditions, they were all role models of perfection in those respective areas. But Roman Empire also collapsed. Because though they perfected certain secular skills, they could not withstand the onslaughts of time and the onslaughts of demanding new demands of changing society. Now, turning to a culture which upheld the supreme spiritual values and which preserved those values and which survived in course of time, Swamiji refers to Indian Vedantic tradition. When he landed in Colombo in 1897, Swamiji was given a warm reception. And then the next day, the following day, Swamiji gave a memorable talk in the Floral Hall in Colombo. There, he makes a very memorable statement. He says, if the ancient sages, he refers to Manu, visited India today, they won't find themselves in a strange land. And he also said they won't be bewildered. Now, Swamiji is here referring to an ancient lawgiver who may have lived around 7th or 8th century BC. And he says, if that sage comes back today means 1897, he will find the same Vedic culture which prevailed in India in the 8th or 7th century, continuing to exist and becoming and growing in relevance and importance and applications in modern times. And he gives a clue as to why this spiritual culture could survive in India. He says because Vedantic culture upheld certain eternal spiritual values. So if you uphold an eternal value as the guiding principle of collective life of a nation, then that national culture also will become eternal. But if you uphold a relative value like military skill, perfection in secular life, then you may reach a very high level of perfection. But after some time, after some centuries, those skills will become extinct. Here, he gives the example of Egyptians, for example. How the Egyptians managed to build a huge pyramid, see, Ramses II, and how they perfected the technology of preserving the ancient mummies, and how they actually developed these extraordinary skills in preserving old relics, in constructing huge pyramids, making use of huge granite rocks weighing tons and tons. That too, the most ancient Egyptian pyramid dates back to 3rd millennia BC. That is almost 5,000 years back it was constructed. It remains there, but those skills have vanished. The ancient Egyptian civilization is no more found anywhere in Egypt, in today's Egypt, in its living form, because they concentrated on perfecting secular skills, which he calls artha and kama, which means enjoyment of things of this world and the pursuit of the necessary tools and instruments which enable you to enjoy worldly comforts. That's why he says those civilizations which upheld certain eternal spiritual and moral values, universal values, became eternal, and they evolved into culture. On the other hand, those civilizations which did not uphold these eternal spiritual universal values became extinct because they upheld values and concepts which were not eternal. This is how he draws a comparison between these two. Now, coming to another subject, Swamiji says, at the higher level, civilization merges into culture. But very often it doesn't happen. Civilizations which are confined to life in this world, which have no concept of a continuity of human existence, generally die out in course of time. I shall make this point further clear. There, Swamiji brings in the idea of cyclic progression in contrast to the straight line progression theory of historians. He says human civilizations, the collective life of humanity moves in cycles, not in a straight line progression. So somebody asked him, you find in Gargi's book, somebody asked him, does that mean that history repeats itself? Then his reply was, history repeats, but not exactly. That was his reply. So he says, civilizations move in cycles. Every civilization has to go through 4 distinct and different stages of evolution. In its first stage, it becomes a bit conservative, a bit orthodox, but it stresses spiritual values. There is rigidity, conservatism, orthodoxy, and there is a lot of unjust discrimination between different levels, different strata of society. This is the disadvantage. The advantage is that such civilizations which become conservative, which concentrate on preserving spiritual values, preserve eternal spiritual values. And he says those civilizations which had their origin on the river banks developed into these higher cultures. They became conservative, but they also evolved spiritual values. He refers to the civilizations along the Indo-Gangetic Valley, the Volga, and the Nile, and these are Euphrates and Tigris. These are 4 civilizations that he refers, which evolved and grew and reached their zenith of perfection on the river banks. But at the same time, not all these civilizations grow into culture, because culture is something universal. Culture is it related to the inner growth of the individual. though it refers to the collective life of society as a whole, it gives equal importance to the inner spiritual and ethical growth of the individuals. In contrast to this, civilization doesn't look into the inner spiritual growth of individuals. It is completely superficial because it is essentially collective in its perspective. So highly civilized nation, a highly civilized society may be able to develop advanced machinery as the Romans did. If you read history of Roman Gibbon's, the decline and fall of Roman Empire, you find during the early centuries, the Romans perfected almost a foolproof system of administration, architecture, the Mausoleum, Roman mausoleums, and the Roman roads, Roman aqueducts. These are all supreme examples of engineering skill and perfectionism in secular activities. So they developed those skills. But at the same time, towards the end of towards the concluding 3-4 centuries of Roman Empire, Rome was steeped in all kinds of immorality, injustices, slavery, bloodshed, and so on. That's because they did not look into the inner growth, the spiritual growth of the individual. The very concept of collective life began at the collective level and it ended at the collective level. Culture, on the other hand, gives equal importance to the ethical, inner, spiritual growth of the individual. Only culture can encourage and promote spiritual values. Civilizations generally do not promote spiritual values because spirituality is essentially an individual affair. Spirituality is not a collective affair. Spiritual values may be propagated, may be promoted through organizations and institutions and congregations. But the higher spiritual development, the intuitive mystical experience, the higher inner spiritual growth takes place at the individual level. So very often, the very nature of organizational structure and the very ideal of perfectionism in secular ways of life and secular values, which are important in civilizations, block the growth of higher spiritual values and spiritual pursuits of the individual. Therefore, Swamiji says, what we need today is a synthesis of the best elements of culture and the best elements of civilization. So the first stage, as I mentioned earlier, was the stage in which spiritual values originate, grow, and reach their perfection. But at the same time, very often, such a society tends to become conservative and rigid. That is a drawback of the first stage of evolution of society. The second stage of evolution of society is this. Swamiji says, people who are active, dynamic, who give more importance to warfare, military campaigns, become prominent in the second stage of evolution of society. Here, the evolution is from top to bottom. If any of you are interested, if you read the works of Professor Sorokin, who came later, he incorporated some of these ideas in his own concept of history. Arnold Toynbee also. When Arnold Toynbee speaks about the challenge and response theory and the waves theory in historiography, how nations emerge, grow, and then collapse, how civilizations emerge, grow, and collapse. Toynbee speaks about the mechanism of social response and social challenge and social response. So Swamiji says the second stage is the stage in which a society gives importance to people who are generally very active. And he, in fact, if the first stage, it can be called the stage in which the Brahmanical values become prominent. Brahmanical means spiritual. That's the sense in which we have to understand it. Swamiji's own contribution towards historiography, in which the higher spiritual values become prominent. And these values, in a way, existed in all civilizations. But the point is, many of these civilizations did not give prominence to those values. They gave prominence to secular values. So they collapsed. So during the second stage of evolution, Swamiji says, sometimes those who are generally very active, very dynamic organizers and military generals, great conquerors, great adventurers, they become the icons of society. There also, there is an advantage, there is also a disadvantage. The advantage is they are not as conservative, as orthodox, as rigid as the icons of the first stage of evolution. They are more broad-minded. But at the same time, there is a lot of cruelty and ruthless persecution of the weak by the strong. That's what he says. This is the second stage of evolution. And the third stage of evolution is the stage in which the society gives importance to people who are engaged in economic and financial pursuits, when they become prominent. So, in fact, he says it was during this period that certain nations undertook sea voyages, discovered sea routes in pursuit of the markets, in pursuit of raw materials, and in later centuries they colonized nations. This happened not only from 16th century onwards. This happened even during the early days when Polynesians and Carthaginians and others, Romans and others, who went in pursuit of distant lands, discovered sea routes, established trade relationships with distant, remote lands, and later on exploited and colonized those distant places. Now, here, at this stage also, there is an advantage, there is a disadvantage. The advantage is they are very broad-minded. Ideas are easily distributed. The disadvantage is they become highly exploitative, and they are always guided in their actions by profit motive. Economic benefit, profit become the guiding principles of all the activities of society during this stage. And the fourth stage is the lowest stage, where spiritual and higher intellectual pursuits are completely neglected. But there is perfect egalitarian spirit, there is perfect democracy, equality of all in all areas of life. There is a great distribution of the existing value systems, but the higher spiritual and intellectual values will be relegated to the background. They will be neglected by the society. Now, coming to culture again, Swami Vivekananda says, the ideal culture is that in which all the plus points of these four stages of social evolution will converge, and all the negative parts will be excluded. So the intellectual culture, the spiritual culture of the first stage, minus its rigidity and conservatism, and the dynamism and the administrative skill of the second stage, minus its cruelty and exploitation. The broad-mindedness of the third stage, minus its profit motive or profit orientation. And the egalitarian spirit, the democratic spirit of the fourth stage, minus the cultural and spiritual degradation which normally accompany that kind of democratization. If these four stages can be synthesized, that will become an ideal culture, and it could also be called an ideal civilization. He says, Swamiji says, the world humanity is slowly moving towards that stage of perfection in the evolution of culture. Even in 1897-98, in those days, more than a century back, Swamiji predicted that the humanity will become one. Science and technology have made humanity one global village now, though he did not aim at it. But whether the original leaders of science and technology wanted it or not, the whole humanity has become one unit now. So whatever happens in one part of the world affects people living in another part of the world. There is no such thing as an insular culture or insular civilization in modern times. So it becomes the entire humanity has become one family. But this was achieved by the benefits, by the blessings of science and technology. As I said earlier, science and technology could achieve this, but could not teach mankind how to effect the same synthesis and unity and harmony at the spiritual level. For that, we have to turn to Vedanta. That is the gradual conclusion which Swamiji comes to. And Vedanta teaches us that real unity, real synthesis, real harmony can be accomplished only at the spiritual level, not at the scientific or technological or sociological level. The reason he gives is that science and technology could do away with physical distances, but it could not bridge psychological and spiritual distances between nation and nation, between individual and individual, society and society. This synthesis, this harmony, this convergence can be accomplished only by synthesizing the best of the modern and the best of the traditional. If you revert back to the ancient tradition, neglecting the realities of modern contemporary age, then you won't be able to solve the problems that we are confronting in today's world. Eradication of poverty, eradication of illiteracy, and then removal of economic and social backwardness. All these problems can be removed. They can be eradicated only with the help of science and technology. Rather, making proper use of science and technology. Now, how do we learn the technique of making proper use of science and technology? He says this is possible only by spiritual culture. So civilization becomes complete, it becomes perfect only when it converges with culture, and this culture should be guided by spiritual values, and he calls it Vedantic values. By spiritual values, Swamiji doesn't mean religious values at all. This is a very important point that we have to keep in mind. He draws a clear distinction between religion and spirituality. There are many places in which he equates religion with spirituality, but there he defines religion as the manifestation of divinity already in man, as realization of the inner divinity, as the translation of the truth of spiritual oneness into all aspects of our individual life. So whenever Swamiji defines religion as spirituality, he speaks positive things. He speaks in favor of religion. But whenever he criticizes religion, What he means is the religion interpreted as dogmas and doctrines and rituals and conventions have no place in modern man's life. Because when religion is interpreted as dogmas and doctrines, they become divisive. Instead of civilization graduating into culture, the civilization itself becomes more divisive if it is guided by religion in its narrow dogmatic sense. But when religion is interpreted as spirituality, it becomes a unifying, a synthesizing, a harmonizing, a converging force. That is his interpretation. And for that he said, according to Swamiji, Vedantic philosophy is the only guiding principle for a universal culture. You can find when in the 6th volume and in the 3rd volume, especially when he deals with the ideals of practical Vedanta, you can find that Swamiji says that when you progress in spiritual life, on the one hand, you realize that the God as the immanent, omnipresent and transcendental reality is the residing principle, the guiding principle, the regulating principle that exists in everything in this world. To what extent that divinity manifests decides the different levels of living phenomena. There he says the difference between an amoeba and a Buddha is one of degrees, not of kind. Not that amoeba is different from, altogether a different entity from Buddha. Buddha signifies the stage of spiritual unfoldment, the supreme spiritual enlightenment. What he says, in amoeba, this spirituality manifests at a very low level. In a Buddha, it manifests in its complete or perfect dimension. So, as one travels inward, as one progresses and develops in spirituality, he realizes that within him resides the immanent reality. And this brings about a total change in his attitude towards the rest of the world. As he realizes that he himself is in fact potentially divine, as he says, his soul is potentially divine. And as he manifests this potential divinity, as this divinity begins to express itself in his whole life, when it becomes part of the totality of his life, then his attitude towards the external world also undergoes a radical change. He begins to look at the external world as one spiritual family, as non-different, non-distinct from himself. In the Upanishadic language, there are two great statements in the Upanishads. There are 4, of course, but 2 statements are very important. One is sometimes called Upadesha Vakya. It means that's how the guru, the teacher, instructs the student. Tattvamasi, you are that supreme reality. That's the meaning. In the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad, Uddalaka teaches Shvetaketu. 9 times he repeats this advice, you are that supreme reality, the immanent principle. Now, when the student realizes this, when he realizes that within him resides that immanent reality, simultaneously, he also realizes that the entire creation is non-different from that immanent reality. So the immanent reality is realized also as the omnipresent, all-pervading, and also the transcendental reality. So, this is the spiritual side of it. Now, Swamiji says, this is the essence of Vedantic principle. It is this Vedantic philosophy which alone can synthesize culture and civilization. Rather, in other words, it can help you to evolve civilization into culture. It is universal, it is unifying, it is synthesizing, it is harmonious. And it doesn't tolerate any distinction between man and man, or woman and woman, or between the humanity and the animal kingdom, or between the humanity and the total existence. Because even animals, plants, oceans, valleys, rivers, stars, galaxies, these are all included in the scheme of this cosmic existence. So ultimately, as the society evolves more and more, it evolves from less gross to more subtle, from grossness to subtlety, from many to one, and from without to within, from divisive, dogmatic, religious ideas to unifying, synthesizing, harmonizing spirituality. So any civilization which gradually evolved, these ideas became perfect, became universal in its outlook, it became culture. Only such civilizations deserve to be called culture. So every civilization in ancient times which upheld these values gradually developed into culture. And culture is eternal, civilization is changeable. Civilizations are nothing but passing phases of human evolution, collective evolution. Culture, on the other hand, it is eternal, it is value-oriented, it is built upon certain eternal, spiritual, universal values. Swamiji's contributions were later recognized, and you can find the echoes of Swamiji's ideas in the works of many of the later historians. Maybe the most prominent historian who completely incorporated Swamiji's ideas in his scheme of historiography was the great author, Arnold Toynbee, himself the British historian, who evolved his concept of the cyclic motion of human civilization and human culture. There he makes a very clear demarcation between culture and civilization. In fact, this was a singular contribution of Swamiji, because before Swamiji, the very idea of culture and civilization were entirely different. Very often they were interpreted as the same. But Swamiji says that culture, as I am repeating towards the conclusion, I want to repeat this idea once more. Culture signifies inner spiritual growth. It is unifying, synthesizing, harmonizing. It enables you to look at the entire humanity as one spiritual family. It is universal in its outlook. But at the same time, it is somewhat individualistic in its outlook, because it's the individual who grows in spiritual life. Civilization, on the other hand, as understood in sociology and anthropology, signifies an advancement, a stage or a phase of advancement of the collective life of a nation or a society or a people. A civilized nation, a civilized society is at home with the latest electronic gadgets, the latest tools and instruments of science and technology. It is efficient, it is organized. At the same time, it may make use of the fruits of science and technology for wars and battles which may lead to the extinction of humanity from the planet. Culture, on the other hand, it gives man or woman the wisdom which enables him to avoid making use of the fruits of science and technology for destructive purposes, and also teaches him to make use of them for creative and constructive purposes, for the good of humanity. So on the one hand, it has got the ethical dimension, culture. It enables you to look upon entire humanity as one spiritual family. So ethical philosophy itself is a natural byproduct of the higher culture. On the other hand, it also enables you to grow spiritually. Based on this, Swamiji evolved his dictum, Atmano Mokshartham Jagat Hidaya, one's own spiritual growth and for the good of the world. So I have tried to give a brief outline of Swamiji's concepts of culture and history. In fact, many of us are not aware of the implications and the influence of Swamiji's ideas in the works of later historians. Maybe the most, as I said earlier, the most prominent historian who completely incorporates Swamiji's ideas and who, in a way, built his own concept of historiography on this idea was Arnold Toynbee himself. So thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.